All right, well, hello and welcome to everyone for our webinar today. This is our Webinar Wednesday event, and today we are focusing on transforming Prospective, the community action poverty simulation. So we are happy to have you all join us today for this presentation. I'm going to give a few introductory remarks and housekeeping items, and then I'll pass it over for our presenters for today. So this is one of our Webinar Wednesday events, and we are recording this event. I am the host of the webinar and kind of moderating with the presenters, and I'm Courtney Kohler. I'm a senior associate with the National Community Action Partnership. I will be also helping with the background technicalities of the webinar today. So if you are having any issues with audio or hearing us throughout the presentation, please type in the chat and I'll attempt to help you. Sometimes if your computer audio is not working very well, you can go to the Communicate tab in the upper left-hand corner, go to Audio Connection, and try to switch your connection to your phone. Sometimes that will come through a little bit better. Everyone is muted for the presentation today to cut down on background noise, as we may have a larger group. But we do definitely encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar, and you can do so through the chat box. And so there is a kind of talk bubble towards the bottom of your screen, and if you'll send your questions to all panelists whenever you type them in, that would be the most helpful. And then we'll definitely be taking some questions towards the end. And with that, I think I'll go ahead and introduce our presenters for today and talk a little bit about why we chose to focus on this topic. So today we're going to be talking about poverty simulations. And these are one tool that can be used as an experiential event to educate the community, also to inform fields that are connected with the mission of community action. It can also help to bring people together from various disciplines and backgrounds to learn about and talk about poverty. It can also help to examine personal biases, also transform perspective, so shifting from a lighter understanding of what it is to experience poverty to more of a full understanding of that. It can help to start conversations within communities and groups of people, and it can also help to lay the foundation for partnerships to address community level needs. And this is one of the things that I think is kind of most important as we're starting to renew our focus on community level initiatives in the Community Action Network. We know that poverty looks at multiple dimensions and it's very complex. And so community action agencies and state associations around the country are in a unique position to be able to provide this type of education to their local communities. So whether you already do poverty simulations or you're interested in starting them, this webinar is going to give kind of the purpose of the simulation experience with an example of how it's being used at the University of Missouri in Kansas City. It's being used there to educate students, and this could also be an opportunity to consider who you might be able to partner with in the community when conducting poverty simulations to expand the reach of that education. So today we have the Missouri Community Action Network, which is the Missouri State Association, and they are going to be presenting most of our information for today. We also have Stephanie Ellison. She is the Associate Dean of Learning Initiatives. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jessica Hoey now and Evan Melkersman at Missouri CAN, and they'll give some more further introductions.
Hi there, everyone. As Courtney said, my name is Jessica Hoy, and this is Evan Melkersman, and we work at Missouri Community Action Network, or Missouri CAN, which is the statewide association for Missouri's community action agencies. And we just wanted to provide some brief introductions of ourselves as well as Dr. Ellison. So I've been at our state association for just about 2 years. I've worked in the human services and association fields for almost 20 years, doing pretty much anything that you can think of that one would do in community services, human services, and association management. And I'm really proud to be a staff member of the Missouri Community Action Network as the Director of Public Affairs and Community Engagement. One of my main focal points with Evan is to oversee the Community Action Poverty Simulation, which we think is a fantastic program. So we're really excited to be here today to present more information to you about that. And with that, I'll turn it over to Evan.
Thanks, Jess. Like Jess said, my name is Evan Melkersman. I've been with the State Association now for almost 6 months, but prior to that, I worked for Central Missouri Community Action as a community organizer for about 6 years before making the switch over to the State Association. And a part of my job working as a community organizer for the Community Action Agency was to conduct and facilitate poverty simulations in our 8-county service area, and we conducted and facilitated as many as 10 usually through our fiscal year. So as the CAPS project manager, I'm responsible for developing, implementing, and evaluating all aspects of the Community Action Poverty Simulation.
Hi,
and Dr. Ellison, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. I'm Stephanie Ellison. I'm a physician and the Associate Dean of Learning Initiatives at the University of Missouri Kansas City School of Medicine in urban Kansas City. And in that role of Associate Dean, I'm responsible for interprofessional education at all of our professional schools, which includes the School of Medicine, School of Dentistry, School of Nursing and Health Studies, as well as the School of Pharmacy. And we have a very rich interprofessional education curriculum where we provide the Missouri Community Action Network poverty simulation to our professional learners. So these are future healthcare workers going out and helping patients, both during their program and in preparing them to go forward and take care of patients. And we feel this is a very important part of our curriculum. So I'll cover that today.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Ellison. With that, before we get started, we wanted to share a little bit more information about Missouri Community Action Network, or Missouri CAN. So as we mentioned, we are the statewide association for Missouri's 19 community action agencies. Our agencies here in Missouri cover all 114 counties and the city of St. Louis, which is considered separate from counties here in the state of Missouri. We also consist of individual members as well as organizational allies and individual supporters. So the services our agencies provide, we have about 3,000 staff at our 19 community action agencies around the state, and a staff of about 15 here at the State Association office that helps to support them. And our overall vision of the work we do here is to help ensure that all Missourians can thrive. So we're looking at not just ending poverty, but also helping people to thrive, to get to that real end goal in mind as our vision. Our mission includes two main focal points. One is to, of course, provide training and technical assistance and program development for our 19 community action agencies, and the other is to advocate for low-income Missourians. So the majority of the work that we do here at the State Association would be similar to much of the work that is done across the country at other community action state associations in regard to advocacy, public policy, training, and technical assistance. The one thing that we do, which we're talking about today, that's probably different than a lot of the other state associations, is that we own the copyright to the Community Action Poverty Simulation. So folks can purchase licenses from us to run a simulation and to conduct those simulations. So with that, we wanted to talk about what we're going to cover in our webinar today. So we have a few objectives that we wanted to cover, and Courtney went over some of those a few minutes ago, but just to kind of drill down a little bit more about what we'd like to cover today. You can see those on the screen for yourself, and really, Evan and I would like you to walk away with 4 main points after you leave today's webinar. One is, what is the overall purpose of CAPS, or the Community Action Poverty Simulation? How effective is CAPS? We have a lot of studies we're going to share with you. What sort of educational framework seem to work best when we talk about delivering a simulation or curricula like CAPS, and how powerful the tool like CAPS can be when it is integrated into an overall learning experience or service learning project. And that's one of the main reasons that Dr. Ellison is on the webinar today, so that she can share with you exactly what that looks like. So with that in mind, those are the objectives we'd like to cover. And as Courtney says, this is really an opportunity using the simulation to lay a foundation for community-level work within community action. So doing the simulation is not necessarily considered community transformation work or community-level work, but it can be part of an overall strategy that a community action agency or state association would use to help create those community-level changes that we're looking for. So with that in mind, let's talk just a little bit more about what exactly is involved in the Community Action Poverty Simulation itself. So again, as we all know, there's lots of acronyms in community action, and our simulation is no different. So you will hear Evan and I say CAPS a lot throughout the webinar today, and that stands for Community Action Poverty Simulation. And really the overall purpose of the simulation is to be an interactive and immersive experience to help folks understand what it might be like to live in poverty. We have a lot of people talk about that they think it's a game, but we always say that the simulation is not a game because we don't want people to treat it as though living in poverty is like a game. And I will say when I interviewed for this position here at Missouri CAN about 2.5 years ago, I honestly had my feelings about simulations and how effective and impactful they were, and even if they were something that human services folks should be doing. But I knew that if I was going to interview for this position here and ultimately take this job, that I certainly needed to get behind the simulation because it would be a key part of my role here at the association. And I will say now that I've been here 2.5 years and even very shortly after I arrived, I have seen so many great results of the Community Action Poverty Simulation and why it can be such a powerful tool if it is used in the right way. So Evan and I want to talk a little bit today about the efficacy of the simulation and how powerful it can be if we follow the steps that we recommend at Missouri CAN in using the Community Action Poverty Simulation. So the first thing that's really critical in the simulation is to do what we call a pre-brief. And a lot of times folks might purchase a kit license from us and think, okay, the simulation is these 4 15-minute weeks, and so the simulation will only take an hour. And that's not the case. To do the simulation in the best way possible, it includes both the pre-brief and the debrief. So the pre-brief is an opportunity once everyone gets settled into their family environments, which Evan will talk about in a little bit. It's really an opportunity for people to feel safe in the environment, to establish the norms and expectations for what will happen in the simulation, and to help people who are there really understand the lay of the land and how the room is set up. And Evan is going to go through that with you. It's also to help folks understand not just those details of the simulation itself, but also the big picture and why people are there at the simulation today. And it's really about helping people see poverty as a structural experience and all the barriers that people might face in society rather than a failure of an individual person. And I'm sure that all of us in community action have heard the phrase, well, why doesn't he or she just pick themselves up by the bootstraps? And the answer we often say at Missouri CAN is, well, what if you don't have a boot to go with the strap? And I think all of us in community action know that poverty is not a personal failing. It's a failing of society to provide the right types of supports that are needed to help people move to a place where they can have economic stability and truly thrive. So that pre-brief really sets the stage for what will be the next hour or so of the simulation to get through those 4 15-minute weeks. And Evan's going to go through that in a little bit more detail. Once those 4 15-minute weeks are over, the debrief component of the simulation is just as critical as that pre-brief. And typically we see that the debrief should take longer than the pre-brief. So the pre-brief might be about 15 minutes or so. The debrief could really go anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour and a half, really depending on if you have a full simulation of 88 participants or if you have maybe a group that's half that size. And Evan will go into some more details about what that looks like. The one key point I want to leave you with right now about debriefs is that some of the studies that we'll talk about today that share information about the poverty simulation actually indicate that if the debrief is not done or if it's not done in a safe environment and in a good way with best practices, doing the simulation can actually be more harmful than it can be helpful. So Evan and I can't impress enough on you today. If you already do the simulation or if you're thinking about purchasing a kit license from us, to really think about what that debrief looks like because it's so critical to having an impactful and effective simulation. So now that we know just a little bit about what's involved with running a simulation, let's talk about the history of the Community Action Poverty Simulation just very briefly. So initially, the poverty simulation was owned by a group out of St. Louis called ROWEL, which is Reform Organization for Welfare. And for various reasons we know that happens to nonprofits, ROWEL disbanded in the early 2000s. And at the time, Missouri CAN was called Missouri Association for Community Action, and we already had a relationship with ROWEL. So we were able to work out a situation with them where we purchased the copyright to their kit, what they called their welfare simulation. So that happened back in 2002. And really, the rest is history. We'll go through it pretty quickly. But around 2004 is when we actually began selling kits to organizations across the country. So we sell the kit license, or the kit itself, not just to community action agencies, but to groups all over the country. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through what the simulation looks like. So once we started getting kits out there, it started becoming more popular. There was a radio piece on NPR in 2006, and once that occurred at the national level, Missouri CAN started getting a significant increase in requests to purchase the kit so people around the country could use it. And then since that time, Missouri CAN has updated our simulation 2 times, once in 2007 and then most recently in 2012 when we added the healthcare component as a resource station. And then finally in 2015, our office started going around the country and offering trainings to folks about how to best run a poverty simulation. So we offer a 2-day training about how to do that, and we'll talk about that a little bit more toward the end in case that's something you're interested in doing. And I will say, even in the past 4 years, the number of trainings we've done throughout the country has increased dramatically, so that in the past 2 years, we have trained 800 people around the country to be CAPS facilitators. And much of that is due to Evan's work here, as well as his predecessor, Mary. So we're really excited to see just all the great response we're having around the country about the simulation. Finally, we just wanted to do sort of a commercial break about if you already own a kit license or you're thinking about purchasing a kit from Missouri CAN, we wanted to cover a few of the legalities about owning what's called a kit license. So when you become a licensee of the Missouri CAN or the Community Action Poverty Simulation, it is a copyrighted material, and we do own that copyright at Missouri CAN. So there's 3 key things to keep in mind. One is that you cannot make money from running a poverty simulation. So we hear a lot of times people ask questions about, oh, I'm going to have a fundraiser. I'd like to invite folks to the poverty simulation, and we'll use that as a fundraiser. That's something that cannot be done with the license agreement that you would sign. What you can do, though, is that if you have expenses related to running a simulation, you can certainly charge a nominal fee simply to help cover your expenses. But you can't charge a fee in such that you would actually make money from doing that. So that's the first point to consider. The second key point to consider is that if you have a kit license from us, you cannot make changes to it. So the license agreement specifically says you can't change Missouri CAN's copyright information, and you can't change how the simulation is run itself. That would include making changes to the family profiles that Evan will talk about later, making changes to the resource stations, and that sort of thing. If you are looking at what we call the school quiz, or you're looking at how you're going to run the pre-brief or the debrief, those are absolutely things you can make changes to and that we would expect you to change because we want to make sure that it's relevant to your own community so that it works best for you. And then finally, because it is a copyrighted simulation, since you don't own that, you cannot brand that as your own. And so again, that includes the Missouri CAN copyright management information that would be on the kit, and making it appear as though you would own the kit. So the kit is owned by Missouri CAN, and we just ask that folks give credit to us when they go out and do their simulations. So those are just a few legalities, whether you're thinking about purchasing a kit from us or whether you already own the kit and might have questions about that. And then finally, I'd like to turn it over to Evan because he's going to talk about the framework for our simulation, what are some best practices that we utilize, and why we utilize those practices in the way we do. So with that, Evan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jess. So moving on, CAPS definitely falls into the realm of what we call experiential education, and experiential education is often contrasted with what's known as didactic education, in which the teacher's role is to really give information, knowledge, and to students, and to prescribe study or learning exercises which have information and knowledge transmission as the main goal. So through experiential education, learners are purposely engaged in direct experience and focused reflection in order to increase knowledge, develop skills, clarify values, and develop people's capacity to contribute to their communities. So on your screen, you see David A. Kolb's experiential learning cycle, and this learning cycle was used as a framework when developing CAPS, or the Community Action Poverty Simulation. And his learning cycle is a four-stage cyclical theory of learning and is a holistic perspective that combines experience, perception, cognition, and behavior. So you start off with having this concrete experience. It's a new experience or an interpretation of an old experience. So that's kind of the doing phase of the poverty simulation. Next, you move into what's called reflective observation, and this is where you recall what happened and then reflect upon the experience. So you're observing or your what stage of the simulation experience. Thirdly, you move into this abstract conceptualization phase where you conceptualize a theory, a model, or a modified understanding of what's been observed. So that's your thinking, that's your so what, now what do we do with this experience phase. And then finally, you move into this abstract experimentation phase, and that's where you plan how to test a model or theory or plan for a forthcoming experience. So that's your now what. So now that we've had this experience, how can we apply that into our personal or our professional lives? So why is simulation-based learning thought to be so effective? In an article titled The Poverty Simulation, Increasing Teacher Sensitivity for Students Living in Poverty by Rice, McCall, and Ogden, which was written in 2017, they state that the desired outcome of simulation learning activities is that participants become confident about making decisions in their own context because they have faced similar circumstances and as a result have developed skills for navigating comparable situations. So simulations engage three major learning domains: your cognitive or your knowledge, your psychomotor or your skills, and then your affective, your emotions, your beliefs, or they engage our hands, our head, and our heart. So in general, people retain 20% of what they hear only, 30% of what they see only, 50% of what they hear and see, 70% of what they hear, see, and talk about, and finally 90% of what they hear, see, talk about, and do. And of course, the poverty simulation has all of those components of that 90% level. So as just mentioned early on, the goal of the poverty simulation really is to shift our paradigm about poverty away from being seen as a personal failure toward the understanding of poverty as structural, which is a failure of society. And the poverty simulation is able to accomplish this by incorporating what's known as Mesereau's 10 phases of perspective transformation. During these 10 phases of perspective transformation, they fall into really four areas. So you have this disorienting dilemma, which is you are presented with a problem that challenges the way that you typically interact with and think about the world. Secondly, you move into this critical reflection realm where you have this self-examination, your critical assessment of assumptions, and so we learn how to articulate, interrogate, and evaluate the assumptions that bolster our worldview during this phase. Thirdly, you move into this reflective or rational discourse area where you identify shared experiences and you explore options of new behavior. So this is really where we look at how our beliefs and feelings are validated or challenged by others, and the goal during this phase is really mutual understanding. And then finally, you move into the biggest arena in Mesereau's 10 phases, and that's your responsive action. So this is where we start to make choices and act upon our transformed perspective. So there's really three dimensions of Mesereau's 10 phases, and that's your psychological, so your understanding of self, your convictional, your revision of your belief systems, and then finally your behavioral, your changes in lifestyle. So now that we've got a firm grasp on the poverty simulation's foundation, we want to zoom out and get a bird's eye view of the CAPS logistics. So this slide is meant to really conceptualize what each section of the room represents in a poverty simulation. And so the poverty simulation takes place in a large room, 3,000 square feet. Your neighborhood is made up of your chairs, which are centered in the room, and then your community services are the tables and chairs that are around the perimeter of this room. For those of you that are a KIT licensee, you've probably seen this layout. This is the official floor layout plan that's included in the director's manual whenever you do purchase a KIT. So this is really to again, give you a better picture about the specific layout of the CAPS. So there's 26 family profiles, and again, you see those families situated there in the center. So there's 26, there's one for each letter of the alphabet. A simulation can technically accommodate up to 88 individuals, including the baby roles. So you can actually have your humans portray the baby roles. We really recommend limiting that or capping it off at 80 active roles and then utilizing the baby dolls that are included with your simulation. So there's, of course, 8 baby dolls. And those are 1 to 3-year-old babies. 40 is really the minimum number of participants that we recommend, so anywhere between 40 to 80, you can really do a really good simulation. There's 16 community resource stations, and again, those are around the perimeter of your community, and you can see that there on the floor layout plan. And to fill these stations, we ask that you have anywhere between 19 to 22 volunteers for a full simulation, and again, that's 80 participants. So these are our families that are in the simulation, and even though there's 26 family profiles, each of the families really fall into 8 categories. And you can see on this slide that the categories are the A through C family fall in the unemployed breadwinner arena. So you have 2 adults, 3 children, and one of the parents is unemployed. And then you move into the D through F families, that they were abandoned by a breadwinner. The G through J families, you have 1 adult that's employed full-time. The K through N families, this is a senior on disability with a family. The O and P families, this is no parent in the home. The Q and R families, this is a divorced father with grandkids. The S, T, U, and V families, these are all of our elderly single individuals that are living on SSI. And then finally, your W through Z families, they are employed grandparents that are raising their grandchildren. So again, there's 26 family profiles, but each one of the profiles fall into really 8 categories or 8 scenarios. And then day of simulation, you can be on site for anywhere between 4 to 6 hours. And this slide really doesn't highlight the weeks or months that it takes to really plan for a simulation. And it also doesn't really highlight what takes place after the simulation. So you do have to account for that time as well. But this is really just to highlight day of. And so you can be on site anywhere between 4 to 6 hours. The setup of the simulation can take anywhere between 30 to 90 minutes. The 30 to 60 minutes is if you've agreed with your site that it's going to be set up before you get there, so all the tables, all the chairs, everything is set up before you get there. The 90 minutes is kind of what you need to, if the site is not going to be set up for you to get there, set everything up. Your volunteer orientation can take anywhere between 60 to 90 minutes, and we do recommend having a volunteer orientation at every single one of the simulations that you do. If you have volunteers that are coming back and they become seasoned, you don't necessarily have to go through the whole orientation process again, but you can talk with those volunteers and you can kind of debrief the previous simulation that you did with them and really continue to foster that group bonding. But if you have brand new volunteers, you want to make sure that you walk them through a good orientation process so they are fully prepared to participate in the simulation as your community resource stations. Registration can take anywhere between 5 to 15 minutes. You also want to include some time in there for them to fill out a pretest or the pre-assessment. The pre-brief itself, which is, like Jess said, your introduction of the community, can take anywhere between 15 to 30 minutes. Your simulation weeks, depending on the size of your group, can take anywhere between 65 to 75 minutes. And then your debrief, like we said, always plan for about a 45 to 60-minute debrief because that is the most important piece of the entire simulation experience. And then finally, you'll finish off with, if you did a pretest, you'll want to do a post-test or a post-assessment. And like I said, the slide doesn't really include the time after, but we do recommend that the facilitators get together sometime after the simulation and really assess each other on how the simulation went and really start comparing their objectives that they set for themselves and then what the eventual outcomes were. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jess, and she's going to lead the way from here on.
And thank you for that, Evan. And one thing I would mention, too, is that Evan does provide a full virtual training that can take up to 3 hours for those who do own a KIT or are a KIT licensee, and if you're interested in really diving into how the simulation is best run. We also, Evan will travel around the country to go provide poverty simulation training, so the first day would include an actual poverty simulation, and then the second day would be training for facilitators and best practices to run a simulation. And then we also offer trainings here in Missouri 3 times a year. And typically those trainings now fill up pretty quickly. So for example, our training in Springfield, I think, has a list of 20 people, a waiting list. And it's pretty much full at already the 80 maximum capacity. But if you are interested in this, Evan's contact information will be at the end of the slides. And certainly he would love to hear from you if you're interested in doing some more training about the simulation or if you just have questions about it. So now that you have a really good, solid foundation of what is involved in the poverty simulation and why we use it, we really want to talk about taking it beyond simply a simulation and really integrating the simulation into other activities that you might do at your community action agency. So as a matter of fact, Evan and I were just on a webinar yesterday that was for state associations in talking about community-level initiatives, transformation, and change. And in that webinar, the facilitators specifically said that poverty simulations cannot be counted as community-level activities. And what that means, as many of you likely know, is that when you're looking at community transformation or community activities, you're really looking at the change that community members would have as a wide, broad set of that community. You're not necessarily looking at the changes that the participants in the simulation might have themselves. So that's one of the reasons a simulation wouldn't be used in and of itself as community-level work or wouldn't be counted as community transformation. However, there are certainly ways that you can incorporate a simulation as part of an overall strategy into a community-level initiative. And so those are some of the things that we want to talk about today in our remaining time, because we have seen some really powerful examples of how the simulation is integrated into the work that many of you do, as well as non-community action agencies. And we'd like to introduce this group to some of those concepts today if you might not already be familiar with them. So in addition to helping to promote poverty awareness, the simulation can definitely also increase understanding of participants in the simulation. And again, what we're talking about, it can inspire local change. And so we have this continuum where we might start with awareness and understanding and then actually move to advocacy. And then finally, the other end of the scale would be looking at the actions that people take and how they actually shift their transformation and their perspective to be involved in doing anti-poverty work long term. And wouldn't it be great if simply by doing a simulation, someone decides, this is what I'd like my life's work to be, and this is what I'll do. But we know that the simulation is really most effective and most impactful when we integrate that into other curricula. So we're going to talk first about some studies that Evan has found, our former poverty simulation manager has found, that really talk about the efficacy of the simulation, where it stands really strong, and where there's some areas that need some additional studies to be done. So we've talked at length already about promoting poverty awareness. We haven't yet mentioned the concept necessarily of developing empathy, but there are some studies that show that the simulation can definitely help increase someone's empathy toward folks who live in poverty. And then again, we'll talk about the inspiring local change component as well. So at Missouri CAN, we're really fortunate that because we own the copyright to the simulation, we have 2 main research areas that we get involved with. First, as Evan can attest to, he receives many requests from academics and scholars in various institutions who say, hey, I'm really conducting research about CAPS or about simulations in general, and I'd like to get some information from you about what you find works with the simulation, how you deliver the simulation, and that sort of thing. So we respond to those requests throughout the year on a pretty frequent and consistent basis. And then the other thing we know that happens is that many universities who conduct the simulation, whether it is the CAPS simulation or if it's something different, they conduct some studies of their own. And Dr. Ellison, while she doesn't have a formalized study, will present some of the data to all of you today that she and her team have collected to show how effective the poverty simulation is specifically with her students. So there's a few studies we like to go through, and we know that sometimes studies are not necessarily the most exciting, but Evan and I have become pretty interested in them as of late because our network here in Missouri has been asking lots of questions about how do we know the community action poverty simulation is actually effective for all the time that we are putting into it. So there's about 3 or 4 studies I'm going to share with you right now. The first one is from the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. It was conducted in 2010, so about 9 years ago, and they were really focusing on a change in knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors. And I've been doing public education work since I started my career in human services about 20 years ago, and I think for me that's always been the gold standard in looking at, is there a change in knowledge, then in attitudes, and then finally in behavior. So what some of the studies show that we have found is that there's certainly significant changes in knowledge. When we go across the spectrum to attitudes and behaviors, we have some differing information. This University of Nebraska Lincoln study is really interesting because there's specific change in students that they studied in their attitudes and beliefs, which is that sort of second phase of the scale. So one area they found that changed was the students realized how serious the experience of poverty can be. And I think all of us in community action know that we see this day in and day out, how significant the effects of poverty can be, including that trauma that people experience and the toxic stress. But for people who don't do this work every day or who haven't been exposed to it, they might think, again, that old adage of, well, just pick yourselves up by the bootstraps, or they may know it's a problem but not really have a full understanding of how significant the impacts can be. So this study found that the students really had a much better understanding of the impacts of living in poverty. They also learned that living in poverty is not the result of someone being lazy or just not wanting to get up and change their lives. They really did learn that there were also some more significant barriers that people face that are those structural barriers we talked about earlier. This study also found that students decrease their biases against people in poverty, and specifically that people in need exhibit many bad habits. So the study found with these students that maybe beforehand they felt that folks in poverty exhibited many bad habits, but after the simulation, the data showed that, oh, well, maybe I was wrong about that. In fact, folks in poverty don't exhibit bad habits. They're more so dealing with structural barriers. And that was one of also the main outcomes from this study. The students also increased their empathy for people in need, for folks living in poverty. And then finally, what's really interesting that Evan and I were talking about the other day is that the students in this particular study did change their own behaviors. It wasn't necessarily their behaviors toward other people in poverty. It was their behavior because they were concerned about living in poverty themselves, that someday it's something they might experience. So it caused the students to really look at their own lives and figure out, oh, wow, what could I be doing that may lead to something like this? So in a way, that's a really interesting outcome because many of us know that people who live in poverty, it's nothing that they have done to bring it upon themselves by any means. There's those structural barriers that they're dealing with. But it certainly caused these students to think about more thoroughly how people get into poverty and stay into poverty and what needs to be done to help them get out of poverty. So that's one key study we found that we wanted to share with you. Another key study was conducted by California State University more recently in 2016. And this study was really focused on whether students would be engaged in more civic work long term. And one thing we found with the studies with the simulation is that certainly folks do the pre-test and the post-test. The post-test may not always be done a very long time after the simulation has ended. So this study was more interested in doing that. And what it found is that they were looking at the simulation and its efficacy in 3 categories. So the student attitudes, their awareness of poverty, and again, their civic action against poverty. And what this study found is that there was some evidence that it may affect students' understanding of poverty in the short term, but not in the long term. So that's a really key finding to note for all of you. But it did, however, foster a lasting sense of personal awareness and also a sense of empathy for those who live in poverty. So in a way, it's a little contradictory because it says that there weren't any long-term or longitudinal effects. However, it did provide this sort of lasting sense of empathy, which many of us know is often the first step to getting folks to take action to end poverty, is feeling that empathy towards folks who live in poverty. So those are a couple of the studies we wanted to highlight. Since we're going to have Dr. Ellison talk specifically about health professions, we also wanted to bring up this study. that was done within the last 10 years as well. So this is specifically related to nursing student attitudes toward poverty. So much of what we measure when we look at the poverty simulation is considered the short-form attitude toward poverty scale domain. So it sounds very fancy, but essentially it's measuring data in 3 areas, which is personal deficiency, stigma against people who live in poverty, and also the structural perspective or barriers that we've been talking about today. So they really wanted to look at those specifically with nursing students. They did their study with 5 campuses. It was junior level nursing students, and 2 out of 5 of their classes experienced the CAPS. So what is really great about this particular study is that they had the classes that experienced the simulation, but then they had a control group that did not experience the simulation. So they could really isolate data for both of the group, the control group and the non-control group, to better sense what exactly is working about the simulation and what is not. What's also great about this study is that the pretest was done at the beginning of their semester or their set of classes. The post-test, though, was not done immediately after the simulation ended. They waited to do the post-test until about 6 to 7 weeks later, and that's where we start getting to more some of the long-term impacts. Not super long-term, since we're talking just about a couple of months, but it's better than immediately after the simulation. So what they found with the control group with the post-test 2 months later is they looked at the personal deficiency, the stigma, and the structural perspective. And you can see some of those questions on the left-hand side of your screen about what specific areas they were looking at. And overall, what this study found is that those who did experience the poverty simulation did, in fact, have an increase in positive attitudes towards those living in poverty versus the students who were in the other group that didn't experience the simulation. So this is a really very scientific study with a little bit more long-term perspective that definitely shows the outcome that the poverty simulation does have an impact on helping increase positive attitudes toward people in poverty, which again is critical to getting folks to take action. So now that you've heard about many of these studies, there's a whole lot more we have, and if you're interested in learning more, certainly Evan and I can share more with you about those later. One thing we wanted to highlight, though, with all these studies is what do they have in common, and there's really 4 main points. The 2 main points, which are good news, is that we did show improvements in attitude toward people in poverty. So that's the first point. The second point is that it definitely increased understanding of poverty overall as a concept and of those people who live in poverty. So those are the really good outcomes. There is a however or a but. The however, as we've already mentioned, is that there is a need for more longitudinal studies that are really critical to show the long-term efficacy of the simulation. And then finally, in all the reading that we have done about the simulation and these studies, it really recommends that simulations not simply be done as a standalone activity or what we call here at Missouri Can a sort of one-and-done activity. We really are showing with all these studies or seeing that the simulation is most impactful when it is done as part of an overall learning experience or as used as part of an overall curricula. So with that, that is the main reason we've invited Dr. Stephanie Ellison from the University of Missouri Kansas City School of Medicine to talk about how she uses a simulation with her students in her health professions program. So Dr. Ellison, with that, we'd like to turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. Can you all hear me okay? Or at least Jess and...
Yeah, we
okay.
can hear you.
Great. Thank you all for attending today. I think the Missouri Community Action Network Poverty Simulation is a really helpful and important learning tool, especially for our health professional learners here at UMKC. As mentioned previously, I'm the Associate Dean for Learning Initiatives, which means I'm in charge of interprofessional education for our professional schools, and I'll talk a little about that. I'm also in charge of service learning, and so that is a really nice way to utilize the poverty simulation as training for engagement, and I'll walk you through what we do for our professional learners here at UMKC. At our School of Medicine, while I represent the School of Medicine, we have the luxury of having 4 professional schools on one block in Kansas City. We're one of 18 other medical schools who have a similar luxury across the United States. So we're in close proximity with one another, and we have a great opportunity to engage in our learning together. And we've done so by implementing the poverty simulation as a learning activity with all of our professional schools. So I'll walk you through that a little bit. We also include social work, which is on our main campus of University of Missouri, Kansas City, but is just approximately 2 miles to the south of us. And so it isn't difficult for us to get together to provide this program. It is part of a longitudinal curriculum, so I really appreciate that when they say it's not one and done. It is important for our students to learn together and to learn with, from, and about one another. So that's what interprofessional education is. When I left medical school and residency, I was just suddenly expected to practice with other professionals that I didn't learn with or from in my medical schooling. And so as an emergency physician, this made complete sense to me that when I came in as a resident, I had to understand roles and responsibilities and how to take care of patients with other professionals, but I had no idea where they came from until I was actually practicing medicine. It is a requirement for our medical school as well as other professional programs to have interprofessional education. The definition, sort of the most simple definition of interprofessional education, is professional students in their program, so during school, learn with, from, and about one another while they navigate their professional program. And in our requirement, it's a minimum of 2 professional learners. So we decided not to just limit it to 2 because we have this great campus with all 4 schools, that we really were going to build a program around as many professional learners and caregivers that were about to go out into practice. To truly do this well, we wanted to make sure they had those relationships to learn with and from and about one another. So our interprofessional education program trains over 600 professional students that eventually serve patients, not all in Missouri, but during their program, they all serve patients during their program. So what's really nice is we implement this fairly early in their professional program, but after they've had a few events together educationally. And at the end, it is linked to a call to service. And I want to stress that because it is part of who they become in a program, and it is a key component of our interprofessional education. There's a lot of words. I'm a visual learner, but what I want to stress is that we've been doing interprofessional education since about 2012, so we are circling around on 7 years. Each year, it's 600 students, and that's from our 4 professional schools that I mentioned, including social work on the main campus. And there are 10 programs that are involved. If you're interested in knowing those degree programs, they're listed on the right there. Bachelor of Science in Nursing. There are 2 graduate programs in nursing. DDS degree as well as dental hygiene degree. We have a master's in anesthesia and a master's in social work, a doctor of medicine or MD, and the physician assistant program are at the School of Medicine, as well as the PharmD program at the School of Pharmacy. And the key here is that all 600 students take part in the interprofessional education curriculum, so there are multiple activities where they learn with, from, and about one another, so they're ready to go into practice. And it's much more natural than what I did when I came out of my own practice. That we name them IPE Days, so it's really clear what they're doing, and the students are freed up from all other activities, and then they combine on small teams of interprofessional learners. And so they have interprofessional teams called Impact, and they stay on those teams for all of the activities so that they have an opportunity to develop a relationship and a practice pattern that is reflective of the people they're learning with, and that they can carry that forward throughout the entire curriculum. The first activity is very early in their training. It's the first year of all of our programs, and there's a patient safety focus because we all agree that that was a great place to start. We model ourselves after the Interprofessional Education Consortium objectives and IPE domains, and we focus mostly on the roles and responsibilities in healthcare on this first event. It gives them a great chance to get to know one another, to start to break the ice, and to learn how often those roles and responsibilities overlap. And these are small, case-based, interactive, facilitated group learning activities. But as Evan mentioned, they are very didactic in nature. They're around a round table solving problems, talking about a patient case, and around safe prescribing practices. And we develop it so that it meets learning objectives of all programs. So we have many faculty involved in every degree program to make sure it's appropriate for the level of learner, as well as making it realistic and important to the learner. The second IPE day then moves on about 6 months later and focuses on social determinants of health, as well as some learning objectives and unconscious bias. And the students combine to talk about their own values and ethics in providing healthcare and a system of healthcare. And so we really felt like this activity, when we developed it, was a nice opportunity to do the poverty simulation to follow soon after. The students practice on a case that addresses a lot of the above issues of food insecurity, homelessness, and then this patient seeks care, but they show how each of the students struggles with providing that care. So they're given an assignment to prepare for this activity and to bring with them different Kansas City community resources that they either use in the care they're providing in their program, or to discover additional items that they can then take with them after this activity and provide to their patients in their clinical environment. And so we make it very Kansas City specific, and then we allow each of the teams to grow with each other in defining those resources and solving problems for patients. And then not long after, in fact, we offer this 5 different times, and I'll explain why, but not long after that event, our students then move on to the third IPE day, which is the Missouri Community Action Poverty Simulation. These are real pictures of the activities, and it shows the level of engagement. Most people have smiles on their faces or a very interactive approach to it, which we really feel appeals to the students. When we evaluated our previous 2 days and events over the last 7 years, they enjoyed the time together and solving problems, but they wanted something more authentic, realistic, and more interactive. And we felt that the poverty simulation really supported that. So we decided to implement it. We have held it 3 years in a row. We're about to host it for the 4th year. We have it limited to 400 professional students, mostly because of size. But we have sent nearly 1,200 professional students through their programs, having been trained in the poverty simulation at key areas where it suited their professional training in our 4 professional schools. They do so in interprofessional families, so our requirement when we set it up is that they remain interprofessional when assigned to families. As the presenters mentioned, they don't recommend exceeding 80 learners in a simulation, and we do not. We really stick with the poverty simulation as it's written and abide by the recommendations for the pre-briefing and debriefing, et cetera. What we found is this activity hit a lot of those domains that were more difficult for us in interprofessional training. It increased their opportunity to work as a team and in teamwork on a simulated case. It met the students' needs on delving into the experiences of our patients more deeply than a classroom activity. And it allowed them to develop communication and solve problems in a completely novel way. And that's been one of the positive feedback items we've had consistently from our student learners. We're lucky, we're practicing here in Missouri, and we are provided the Community Action Network statistics every year. And so what we have done in the pre-briefing and during the simulation itself, we provide those Missouri Community Action statistics about patients living with food insecurity as an example. And when we have our 15-minute week, we stop, allow students to reconvene in their families and talk about real issues that they're dealing with, sort of surrounding those statistics. And as we introduce them into the next week and they move on. We have a very extensive debriefing that occurs at the end of their month of living in poverty, and we actually keep them in their families, and we move around the room so they can describe their experience, and they can contrast and compare other families living in the same experience. And I did the training in the poverty simulation along with my colleague who's a PharmD at the School of Pharmacy, and we run every simulation we have for our professional students to ensure that debriefing is part of what every one of the student families goes through. And so we make sure to highlight different experiences that occurred and allow them to talk about what they're doing, describing their problem solving, and reinforcing ways that when they approach their clinical care for patients down the road, that they demonstrate their understanding of poverty in that debriefing where possible. I guess we got lucky. I didn't realize you added the healthcare station in 2015, and that's when we implemented it. But we did add a few questions that allowed them to reflect on how little patients in the poverty simulation were able to actually get to the healthcare station on the outside of the room, so that they can recognize that their limitations in meeting those social determinants of health meant remaining healthy or even accessing care becomes difficult. It was the least visited station in all of the stations in the poverty simulation. That debriefing can take for us, similar to the schedule they provided, anywhere from 60 minutes to 90 minutes. And in a number of simulations, it's gone over. The students themselves bring up more things to discuss and in reflecting on their experience through the poverty simulation. And we hold these in the evenings during the week and on one weekend, and the students still stay and engage with questions and comments about what they have experienced. At the end of our poverty simulation, what we did is provide a call to service. Service learning is a requirement in a number of our professional programs, and the definition of service learning is that students are provided training and then time outside of the curriculum to engage in the community, and that they also debrief on it, so that there's an opportunity for them to understand how that allows for their development and possibly changes in attitudes, knowledge, and behaviors. Just as they mentioned, we don't consider this to be actual community engagement. It is training to allow our professional students a deeper understanding of poverty and to inspire them to take a call to service. In doing so, we have created a UMKC directory of community agencies that are both local and a little outside of our community around UMKC, so that they have real opportunities to take this training forward and do something as they navigate the remainder of their professional programs. All of this directory are UMKC sort of sponsored community engagement opportunities, meaning we know they're engaging people very much like the patients that they see in our urban core of Kansas City, where we are located and where a lot of their clinical experiences are. And so this, I think, is very powerful. And we actually ask them to take this call with one partner on their interprofessional team, or multiple, but that they don't just stay with the professional that they're learning with, but they're ready to partner with someone else. We think the power of interprofessional education is that our learners can learn about ways to make an impact and advocate for their patients by learning this together, and then the power can be in how they take that forward at the conclusion of this curriculum. We are looking to track that service learning and engagement in the future. We may even actually be requiring it, because we each, as our individual entities, require service learning, but we're looking at ways to build these relationships interprofessionally so that they know how to solve problems for their patients, both in their professional program and as they go into their practice. And we are hoping some of them become patient advocates in many different ways as they become professionals in their area of expertise. As an associate dean, I can't help but tell you about learning objectives very specifically. But what I hope for those that are involved in the webinar is that you can see ways we might be able to meet your curriculum needs, or ways that we have done so in our own curricula. But our students walk away understanding and learning poverty statistics regarding their patients living at the median poverty level right now. We also discuss community resources, and we go around and reinforce that each and every time we talk about these statistics, so that it becomes more a practice of theirs, even the day following the poverty simulation in their clinics, whether it's a dental clinic, it's a pharmacy, it's on a clinical rotation, and that they really know how they can advance the health of their patients by meeting these specific needs. It's a novel way to contribute as a healthcare team member to incorporate these concepts and understand ways to help our patients get healthy. It teaches them new novel ways to work as a multidisciplinary or interprofessional team in a new way to develop these skills. And our students really do get an understanding to develop how our patients are affected in cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and in teenage pregnancy. And so we talk about real resources and abilities to define the social determinants of health and to meet the needs of our patients going forward. We do have some qualitative statistics. this was utilizing the questionnaire that is provided by the toolkit. These were comments, however, at the end, and each year we look at the comments and make modifications regarding our poverty simulation to try to make improvements. The white are the positive comments, and it's about roughly out of 500 surveys that we had. They did get that real feeling that it was realistic. They were stressed out, and they understood some of the specific struggles faced by the poor. Many of them made comments about enjoyment or understanding and learning about specific resources. Many of them felt it was well run, and then they learned about poverty statistics at the same time. And again, these are just the comments, not the questions. I'll cover those in a moment. For the time that it took to start and complete, we had 80 learners, and so check-in takes some time. They're very, they're professional students, so they're very type A, and they really have a lot of responsibilities, so they want us to go fast, but we really needed to check in and put them in their families, but not give some that checked in early an opportunity to be ahead of the others. So we didn't let them open the packet and understand their roles or their family until all of them were convened in their families. They talk about it being more of a game, and since this evaluation, we have since adjusted it so that in the pre-brief, we talk about, while there are fake dollars and there are transportation passes, and a lot of this seems like tokens of a game, we emphasize that these stories and these families are real, and that you're living the role of someone who has experienced poverty in this way. And that while it may seem false in a lot of ways, it's definitely not a game, and it's an opportunity to really understand what it's like to walk in their shoes. The resources and stations not being well explained, that is part of that tension that's created, is that walking through poverty, no one gets a handbook. And so we've added some guidelines to that, is that we introduce all of the stations and we give them some ideas of what's out there for them, much like it would be for a patient or a person living in poverty. But they tend to want more of a rule book because they're professional students. And that creates some of that tension. Nobody gets a rule book on what it takes to live in poverty. And so we kind of let them know up front that this is what you've got. Now go and follow these guidelines and try to make it work, knowing there are challenges that come along the way. The felt uninvolved, we've actually had a small group of students that we asked them to debrief on what that meant. And it's when they chose not to really take part and learn how quickly they could be successful at navigating these problems. And the felt uninvolved was more of when I didn't take part actively, I didn't really get to learn. And so we tell them up front is the more you do, the more you learn about your patients and what it's like to live in poverty. I really loved some of the key statements and quotes that came from our student comments. And again, it was around 500, but these two really captured what we were trying to accomplish for professional students in all of our programs. I think the key takeaway was that people are not able to improve their situations because of many obstacles that stand in their way and because of lack of knowledge of available resources. The debriefing, a lot of students said, do our patients know about all of this? Because I learned a lot knowing about it now. And what is the equivalent here in Kansas City so I can tell them about it? I can tell them how to fill their prescription. I can tell them where they can get some advice around transportation or childcare. And so they really grew their own knowledge in a way that allowed them to help their patients tomorrow. I gained a better understanding of what being impoverished and struggling to make ends meet physically looks like. While no simulation can ever do poverty justice, there were definitely some generalizable aspects that I learned, how busy and stressful days look like when you have to plan out how to pay bills, how to pay to get from point A to point B, etc. It was great working with my peers from other programs as well and working together to try to subsist. What I love about these comments is I can't guess what professional program they're from, even though they come from 5 or 6 different programs based on our simulations. But that is the goal of what we want our professional students to know about our patients struggling, and that they themselves walk away with a real working knowledge and empathy for that. These are the questions that are provided in the toolkit, and so we did not provide the pretest with much time before. They don't fill it out on the day of, but in the days leading up to the simulation. So we ask them to do the pretest, and it's usually 2 days to 1 week before the simulation. And then we have them fill out the post-test within days of completing the simulation, only because our students have other requirements and activities, and we didn't want this added onto a testing schedule. So you don't see a statistically significant budge in the mean comparison, but we do see positive direction in terms of shifting of knowledge, that there are, the community provides effective and efficient service to help families with low income live, that the pre and post, shifts in a way that's more positive but not statistically significant. We're looking at ways to manage our assessments better, so we capture this information in a way that helps both advise on the effectiveness of the poverty simulation and also guides us in making improvements to our curriculum. I will also note that we didn't always have matched surveys. This was it was worth a limited number of points, and some students just didn't go back in and complete it. So we only had 234 matched to 500 to actually have pre-post data. And so the comments we included either way for the post, but we just couldn't get a lot of matched data. In summary, we really feel like this is our hallmark activity of our interprofessional education curriculum. The students in our evaluation of the curriculum rate this most positively of all of our 3 activities. They feel it's realistic, enjoyable, and informative. It showed that our students what we wanted them to see is that poverty is a complex social issue and a barrier to our patients right now in Kansas City, and that it would hopefully help them develop ways to provide health care in the system that they're providing it in now, and in order to move forward in who they become as a professional in their field. We also provide real live resources and have had students come back and say, I know about this great program in Kansas City, add it to your directory because this is what I tell my students about, my patients about. So it has allowed students to give some feedback to us on opportunities in the community to engage and better the lives of patients in our community outside of our healthcare system. And then the stressful situation felt very authentic to students and allowed them that deeper appreciation and development of empathy faced by the poor and those that they're seeing right now. If you'd like more information, we do have this link to our UMKC Health Sciences campus, which highlights our interprofessional education program in our Health Sciences campus. There's a video on that webpage, or you could go straight to the video, which is listed below, which provides testimonials from our students and our provost on this learning opportunity for our professional students working and learning together here at UMKC. Well, let me hand this back over to Jessica to take back over.
Thank you, Dr. Ellison. We really appreciate the way that UMKC is utilizing the poverty simulation, and you really hit the nail on the head with everything you said. So thank you so much for what you're doing with your students and walking them through this process. So thank you for that.
Yes, thank you.
And to wrap everything up, we thought it would be great to kind of end on sharing another study and another article that had been done that really highlights a lot of what we've been talking about. And one of the things that we really discuss in our training when we run the simulation is that the simulation itself is really just the beginning. It is, in fact, the tip of the iceberg. And there was an article in the study that was done back in 2006. So it's an older study, but what we really liked about it is that there was about 4,000 individuals over the course of about 10 years that have participated in the simulation and in this study, and so that's where they really got their numbers from. And it comes from the University of Georgia. But they conducted and published this study, and the purpose of the study was to show that the simulation is effective in changing attitudes and increasing the participants' level of confidence in helping poor and near-poor individuals. They determined that participants significantly improved their attitudes, like Jess was talking about, toward individuals living in poverty, and the participants also increased their confidence in helping those in poverty. And also what this study highlighted is what you can truly do once you leave the room that the simulation takes place in. And if you just leave the simulation experience in that room, that's where it's going to stay. But if you take it and you go out into your community, that's really where the impact starts happening. And that's what these individuals, these Georgians really did. So a couple of advocacy-related outcomes for participating in these simulations was that individual teacher decisions about student student discipline was one area. So we, in a simulation, after simulation, a school counselor actually stated that she had to return to the administrative office immediately to reverse a decision to remove a child from the school, and indicated that her school would be reconsidering its criteria for such actions, and that came as a result of her experience in the simulation. Secondly, there was this reducing barriers, time and workplace expectations. So another group of teachers who participated in a poverty simulation during this time implemented a plan for holding parent-teacher conferences actually at parents' work sites or by telephone rather than requiring parents to come to the school. So they ultimately removed that barrier for the parents. Thirdly, there's this reducing barriers, but this was more of a transportation and time arena. So after discussing some of the barriers identified through the simulation experience, teachers realized that many parents simply did not have transportation to and from polling sites and could not afford to pay taxi or bus fare. So the teachers contacted local government to request that free public transportation be made available on Election Day. Government officials granted the request, and while the actual number of individuals who rode the bus to vote could really not be documented, this action was successful in addressing a real barrier that was imposed by poverty. And then finally, there were some structural changes at the local government level. So this group actually conducted a poverty simulation for their city leaders, and participation in the simulation increased their awareness of the challenges facing low-income residents, leading to a commitment to eliminate obstacles facing low-income citizens and to reduce poverty in their city. So simulation participants, along with the Office of Economic Development, spearheaded efforts to form an anti-poverty task force in their community. Their work focused on transportation, healthcare, dependent care, affordable housing, asset building and education, workforce development, and to date, the results of this effort include the development of a policy agenda, the formation of a strategic goal teams to develop action steps, the implementation of an accountability structure, and securing initial funding for personnel public awareness building and implementation needs. So again, this article really highlights the power of the poverty simulation, not just the experience itself, but if participants then take that experience and really start applying that experience to their professional and personal lives, it can truly have some significant impact. And as Dr. Ellison was talking about, and as Jess mentioned, working it into a larger or broader curriculum or a larger community initiative and using it as a springboard for that change is found to be very, very impactful. So Missouri Can is a resource for you. We are here to answer any questions that you might have about the Community Action Poverty Simulation. That is my contact information. One aspect of my job is just helping individuals troubleshoot different issues or scenarios for their poverty simulation. Or if you can't find something that's supposed to be in your kit, give me a call, shoot me an email, and we can help locate that. So just really anything A to Z that you need help for regarding the simulation, that's what we're here for. So that brings us to our questions and comments portion. So does anybody have any questions or comments that they would like to share? Anyone? Going once?
We have one question that has come in here.
Okay.
Is asking about what the cost is for the kit.
Sure. Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So currently, for the next 5 days or so, the kit is $2,150, and in addition to that, you will pay an $85 standard shipping rate for the 48 contiguous states here in the United States. We do ship outside of the United States, but of course that shipping is going to be a little bit more. But bare minimum, it's $2,150 for the kit license. With that, you get the kit fully prepared, ready to go. It is shipped to you. You can start doing poverty simulations as soon as you get the kit. So it's ready to go as soon as you get it.
And so then beginning on Monday, on July 1st, the price of our kit is increasing to $2,300. So the price of our kit at the $2,150 has been that way for many, many years, so we're long overdue for just a minimal price increase. And what I will add to what Evan said is that you may have heard that there are some other simulations out there, but we like to call ours the original poverty simulation. And you'll also notice if you do some other research on other simulations that in some cases you rent the kit. and you may not, you have to return that kit once you're done with one simulation, so you're being charged each time you rent the kit. Whereas, as Evan was saying, with our kit, you purchase the kit license or the kit, and once you have that, you can do as many simulations as you want with that kit. Now, we know, those of us who do the simulation, that certainly putting the kit back together does take some time. It is a bit of an art and some science involved, but once you get that down, then you can really get the kit back together much more quickly as time goes on. And again, you can do the simulation as many times as you want with that one fee.
And included with the kit purchase, you do get a USB drive that includes all of the reprintable material for the simulation. So if you lose any name tags, if you lose any signs, family profiles, things like that, you can access that USB and print any materials that you need to replace it, especially if you're using the same kit multiple times, because for whatever reason, people love to keep souvenirs, and they walk away with some of those items.
Great. And then just a follow-up on that, is the kit user-friendly, or is there any other additional training that would be needed to be able to facilitate the simulation? And
sure.
Just more questions about the training. When would the next training be, if there is a training? And
yeah,
how people access that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we don't require anybody to participate in our training initiatives if they do purchase a kit. The kit does come with a director's manual, and for those that have a lot of knowledge and background in facilitation and teaching and education, that director's manual may be sufficient for going ahead and start facilitating. But a lot of individuals who purchase and organizations who purchase our kit really do highlight the importance of going through our facilitator training because there is a lot of nuances that we do share during that training, some best practice situations. So like Jess said, we do 3 Missouri-based trainings. We do one in March, we do one in July, and we do one in October. Our July training in Springfield is completely full. We've got a wait list of about 22 individuals, and so our next training is actually in Missouri is actually going to be in October. That's October 21st through 22nd, and we're going to be in St. Louis at the Renaissance Hotel right off I-70. So registration for that will probably open sometime in mid-August. But also, like Jess mentioned, we do virtual trainings. One of the requirements that we have for virtual trainings is that anybody that participates in that virtual training must have gone through the poverty simulation as a family member. And those trainings are about 3 hours. We do it through the Zoom-based platform. And a lot of the same information is presented, but we obviously don't have the time to really dive into a lot of the group activities and the group learning activities that we do at our Missouri-based trainings or our on-site trainings. And like just mentioned as well, in 2015, we launched our on-site training initiative to where we actually have the feasibility to travel to different states and conduct our 2-day training right there in your own state. Our 2019 training schedule, travel schedule is pretty much full at this point in time. So if anybody wants us to travel to them, we're probably going to be looking at early 2020 before we can fit you in. So.
Okay, and just in regards to those trainings, are there costs associated with each of those different trainings?
Yep, there sure is. Yep. So our Missouri-based training, there's two registration fees. We offer an early bird registration, and that's $370 per person, but we also do a third-person discount, so that's actually half off. So if you have 3 individuals that are coming from your organization, the first 2 will be charged $370, and that third person will be charged $185. If you wait until after our early bird registration, the price goes up to $420, but again, we also offer that half-price discount for every third person as well. The virtual training, we can accommodate up to 10 participants in that training, and anywhere between 1 to 5 participants is $500, and again, that's just a flat fee. You pay that one time for the training, and then 6 to 10 participants is $750. And then our on-site trainings where we travel to your state, they vary just depending on travel costs and things like that. But they can run anywhere between $4,000 to $8,000 just depending on what that organization is wanting.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
So no more questions here. Courtney, did you have anything to add? You're unmuted.
Actually, this is Stephanie Ellison. If I may, I've been a course director and a clerkship director and the past associate dean for curriculum, so I have some teaching experience and a lot of experience in simulation. But I really felt the training was so helpful. And my cohort is also the director of experiential learning in the School of Pharmacy, and also I think likewise would say the same. We train together. We serve as the debriefers. We've also cross-trained to have other faculty involved in interprofessional education assist us in the debrief and that are heavily involved. But I do feel the training is very worthwhile in supplementing what you get in the kit itself. But each time we give the simulation, I learn more about it, and I find it highly valuable as an educator. But the kit's wonderful, and it will last through our 4th year here. And we've even trained faculty in 2 different regional sites using the kit. So we've probably used our kit up to 20 times at this point, and it's still going strong and doing very well.
That's great.
Thank you, Dr. Ellison.
And this is Courtney, and I was just wondering, you shared a great example from Georgia of, how it kind of spurred people into action after the poverty simulation. Are there any other examples that are kind of top of mind that you can think of that are similar to that, where, the poverty simulation really kind of spun people into action in their local community?
Yeah, I can actually I can highlight a personal experience that I had when I worked at Central Missouri Community Action, but we did a community-based poverty simulation where we invited just different representation from all across the community. So, faith-based, we had community leaders, we had business leaders, we had elected officials, and so what we were basically doing with the poverty simulation was utilizing it as a strategy to develop our community action teams. So each one of those teams was centered around a different pillar of poverty. So, you had economic development, you had basic resources, lifelong learning components, things of that nature. And the simulation was really that foundational understanding of what poverty was like, and then really to inspire people into actionable change to start participating in those community action teams and really start moving the needle in our local community. So that's just a personal example that we launched when I was a community organizer for Central Missouri Community Action. But each one of these community initiatives is as unique to each of the communities that has a simulation kit. So there's a lot of really good examples of just different groups and organizations that are doing that are really transforming perspectives, but they're again using the simulation as a strategy for a broader solution.
And I would say if you're a community action agency that's currently using the simulation and you're using it more as a standalone activity, but you're thinking about incorporating it into a larger scale initiative, please don't hesitate to give me or Evan a call. We would be more than happy to talk through some ideas with you. We can share some additional studies with you. Really would be more than happy to do that to see how impactful the simulation can be in your own local community based on your own community needs assessment.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining this webinar today, and thank you to our presenters. I think that's kind of a great concluding point as we're approaching the 90-minute time allowment. And so definitely thank you, Jess and Evan and Dr. Ellison, for presenting this information today. I think it's very timely for our network and how this can be a tool to kind of lay that foundation for partnerships and for community level work as a larger strategy. So thank you all so much, and I just will conclude with a few partnership announcements. So on the partnership resource library slide here that you can see on your screen, we do have our resource library that includes webinars, publications, and toolkits, as well as online tools. And this is where the recording for the webinar will be posted today, as well as the slides. So we'll get that posted within the next few business days, and you'll be able to go under webinars to access this recording as well as a PDF of the slide deck. On the next slide, just want to highlight our Community Action Academy, which is our online learning management system. It's powered by a platform called Moodle. And so we have free and accessible online e-courses for the entire Community Action Network. It's free to create an account, and we offer peer engagement, virtual networking, as well as use this as a virtual space for learning community groups, as well as the CCAP exam. We also have a mobile app that you'll see on the next slide here for Community Action Academy, and that is also free to download. But basically, you can take Community Action Academy with you on the go and learn, just not at your desk even. So great addition to our online learning management system. Use your same credentials. It's easy to set up. Just type in the moodle.communityactionpartnership.com URL and use your same credentials to log in with the app. You can also create an account through the app as well. On the next slide, just want to promote our annual convention that's coming up at the end of August. August 28th through the 30th are the main convention dates. We have pre-convention sessions happening on August 27th. We'll have our Pathways open enrollment training. We'll also have a Pathways peer reviewer training, as well as emerging leaders trainings as well, and for new executive directors. We have lots of exciting keynotes open set up for the annual convention, and you can get more information on our website if you go under the Events tab and click the 2019 Annual Convention. Just some upcoming webinar Wednesdays that we have in July. We're going to be focusing on re-entry programs on July 10th, and then we're going to be focusing on trauma-informed care on July 17th. So encourage you to mark your calendars for those, and we'll have more details out in the near future. And with that, just want to, if you all have any questions for the Partnership Training and Technical Assistance team, the Learning Communities Resource Center, as well as the Organizational Standards Center of Excellence team is listed here on the slide. So feel free to reach out to any of us. Again, I'm Courtney Kohler, the Senior Associate for Training and Technical Assistance. So any questions specifically on this webinar, you can direct to me. Attending, thank you to our presenters, and also thank you to our partnership staff that logged on to support for today. And with that, we'll go ahead and conclude our webinar. Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.